All right. Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever you are listening to this. We are going to cover introductions and conclusions today, and I wanted to provide a video of the information with my narration just so that if you have questions later, even after we've gone through it in class, it's an easy reference. Or if for some reason you are absent the day that we go over this, it's also a good reference. So, this is a pretty basic formula, but it is also the only formula I have ever really seen as an introduction and conclusion. So let's talk about what needs to be an introduction first. So you need three basic things. A hook, and the job of a hook is to catch your reader's attention. You need to include your background information, and that basically tells us what does the reader need to know in order to understand your paper. And then your thesis statement, which is one sentence that explains what your paper will be about. Okay? So let's talk about a hook next, or first maybe. Your hook can be one of three things. The first is a powerful related quote. So you could, if you're doing a specific person, for instance, you maybe are researching Eleanor Roosevelt, you could look up an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. It could be something somebody else said about Eleanor Roosevelt or Al Capone or whoever your person might be. Or you just find a quote that somehow you are going to relate back to your topic. And so as an example, I found this one by Joe, I'm not sure how to say his last name, Gold, maybe? I'm not sure. He said, sometimes you see something in a fighter and you don't know if it's real. Joe Gold remarked this about one of his famous wrestlers during the Great Depression. And then I thought from there you could go into your background information and talk about how everybody during the Great Depression needed to be a fighter. And even if you didn't know if you were a fighter, if you survived the Great Depression and the horrors of that, you would have been considered a real fighter. Okay? The next option is an impressive fact or statistic related to your topic. So this could be, it could be a variety of things. It totally depends on what your topic is. If you're talking about the Dust Bowl, you might talk about or use a quote about how many animals were slaughtered for some reason related to that, or how many farms didn't survive. Or if you're talking about movies, maybe you use a quote about how many movie tickets were sold during the time. Or if you're talking about Al Capone, maybe you tell us how many people he murdered right off the bat. Something that draws us in. As one example, I found this fact that says between 1929 and 1932, construction projects fell by 80%, contributing to the high levels of unemployment. And then in your background information, you would go on to explain that unemployment was the highest it's ever been at this time in American history, and that there not only was unemployment high, but people also were unable to find work. And somehow or another tie it into whatever your main topic is. Okay? The third and final thing that your hook could be is asking your reader a question. Okay, and I'm going to caution you on this right away. Unless you are having some serious writer's block, I would encourage you as 10th graders not to be using a question as your hook. Okay? It just is kind of the most basic, and I think that you guys are better students than this. So, I did still provide an example, and if you need to start here, you can always write your introduction and then find something different later. Okay? So you could ask something like, were you aware that the unemployment rate during the Great Depression was over 25%? Okay? Question mark there. And then you can go on in your background information to talk about the unemployment rate and tie it into whatever your main topic is. You could ask a question about, do you know where the Dust Bowls happened? Or do you know where the Dust Bowls were Do you know what areas were affected the most by the Dust Bowl? Or do you know what the New Deal projects consisted of? I don't know. It could be a variety of things, okay? And again, I'm just reminding you that this is the easiest option, and I would recommend choosing one of the others. But if you're struggling, start here. Okay, let's go on to background information. So after you have your hook, you are going to include some background information. This is where you will share any key information your reader needs to know about the Great Depression in order to read or understand your paper. Okay, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody, but some areas that you might talk about are information about what led up to the Great Depression. So you could be talking about a little bit about how the 1920s set the United States and the rest of the world up for the drop, the stock market crash. You could tell your reader about what women were doing before the Great Depression if you are writing about women. You could, I've got one more example here, maybe two. You could tell your reader about the crime rates prior to the Great Depression if you are writing about Al Capone, okay? Or maybe you could, if you were writing about some of the projects that the New Deal implemented, you could talk about how there really was no government programs leading up to that time, that we were in need of infrastructure and that the New Deal programs really helped with that. As a reminder, you need to ask yourself what the reader needs to know in order to understand your paper, okay? You cannot assume that Mrs. Toole knows everything. I do not, okay? I am not a social studies teacher. I'm not an expert on the Great Depression. You need to enlighten me on some things, okay? Lastly, your thesis statement, okay? This is going to be the last sentence of your introduction. The last sentence of your introduction. It is one sentence that explains what your paper is about. You should also include a preview of what the main points of your paper are. And we have done this. Remember that your thesis statement should be arguable because you are trying to prove your idea in the paper or in your paper. And like I said, we have already written your thesis statements. You should have that written down in multiple places, and if you don't, let me know. I can help you try and find it, or we can rewrite it, okay? Also remember that this was a working thesis, okay? And before you just assume that it's the same, you should double check that it is still accurate and your body paragraph supports your thesis statement, okay? So those are the three things that should be included in your introduction. You've got your hook, and that can be one of three things. Either a impressive quote or some type of fact or statistic, or if you need to, a question. Then you need to include your background information, and then you need to include your thesis statement, okay? Take a second, and I promise I will be a little bit faster about the conclusion. It is basically an introduction in reverse, okay? You are going to start with your thesis statement, and you need to have it worded slightly different than in your introduction, okay? You are going to include, instead of background information here in your conclusion, you're going to review your main points. Okay, this is where you need to be very, very careful to not include new information. It's going to feel like you're repeating yourself, but you're not. That's what you are, but that's not wrong. That is what you are supposed to be doing, okay? If you have new information to include, go back to your body paragraphs and figure out where it should fit, if it feels like it needs to be in there, okay? And then your final thing is a closing statement, okay? Imagine that you are at a performance and you need to have a really awesome mic drop moment. Okay? This is where it needs to be. I should, just like at the beginning of your paper for your hook, I should be like, ooh, I'm excited to read this. I want to find out what this person has to say. Okay? At the end, I should be like, wow, that was an impressive closing statement. Okay? Also, extra bonus points if you can relate it back to your hook somehow or another. So if you have a quote about how amazing of a woman Eleanor Roosevelt was, find another quote saying that she is amazing, or say something amazing about her, or say something about Al Capone's legacy. I don't know. You need to come up with it, but extra points if you can relate it back to your hook. Okay? All right, so that is the end of the slideshow. Okay, it looks like I've got about 11 minutes on here. I hope that this is helpful. I can't help you if you have nothing. You can't just come to me and say, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me? Okay, I need something specific. You need to be able to say, Miss Toole, I have this for my background information and this is my thesis, but I don't know what I should put for my hook. Can you help me? Okay, that's something specific. Maybe you have your hook and your thesis statement, but you don't know what I need to know. Bring me a couple ideas about what you think you should include, and then I can help you figure that out. Okay? All right, so we will have time to work on your introduction and your conclusion now.